It started like something out of a nightmare. A black woman, tired, holding her purse tight, stood alone on a cracked sidewalk, bathed in the harsh glow of a flickering streetlight. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't causing trouble. She was just there. But to the two white police officers standing just a few feet away, her existence seemed to be a problem. Their voices boomed across the empty street, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Where you think you're going, huh?" one of them barked, smirking like it was some kind of joke. The other laughed under his breath, nudging his partner like they were kids on a playground, picking on someone smaller, weaker. The woman tried to speak, tried to explain, but every word she managed to get out was cut off by another sarcastic question. "What's in the bag? Why are you so nervous? You hiding something?" She wasn't. She was nervous because two men in positions of power were trying to humiliate her in public for no reason. And everyone could see it. A small crowd had started to form on the edges of the sidewalk, people with their phones out, recording, but staying just far enough away to avoid getting involved. Some whispered. Most just stared. And the woman, she stood frozen, looking around like she was searching for someone, anyone to help. No one moved. The officers circled her like vultures, making a show of their authority. One hand hovered near his taser. The other held a pair of cuffs, swinging them casually like a warning. Every second dragged out like an hour. Every insult, every fake chuckle from the officers pulled the woman deeper into a hole of humiliation she couldn't escape. She wasn't a threat. She wasn't breaking any law. She was just a black woman in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong skin color. And as the streetlight flickered again, somewhere behind the laughter, a figure shifted, a man sitting crumpled by a trash can. No one noticed him. No one ever did. They thought he was just another piece of the city's background noise. Another homeless man with no power, no voice, no reason to matter. But in a few moments, he would become the one person who mattered most. She kept glancing around, hoping, praying that someone in the growing crowd would step in. But no one did. Not the man filming from across the street. Not the woman clutching her groceries, pretending not to see. Not the kid on his bike who slowed down just enough to watch the show before pedaling away. The black woman stood there alone, her hands trembling not from guilt, but from fear. Because when you live in a world where just existing can be seen as a threat, fear becomes a second skin. One of the officers leaned in closer, close enough that she could feel his breath on her face. "You gonna make this hard or easy, sweetheart?" he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. The other officer chuckled, already reaching for his cuffs again. And just when it seemed like humiliation would be the least of her worries, just when it seemed like this would end the way so many of these stories do, with another hashtag no one wanted to create, a low, rough voice broke through the noise. That's enough. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was controlled, measured. Like whoever spoke didn't need to shout to be heard. The two officers turned, annoyed that someone dared to interrupt their performance. Their eyes landed on the crumpled man by the trash can, the one they hadn't even bothered to notice, the one they thought was invisible. He rose to his feet slowly, deliberately. At first glance, he looked just like they expected. Ripped jacket, dirty jeans, a beanie pulled low over his forehead. Someone they could ignore, someone they could brush aside without consequence. But then he pulled something from inside his jacket. Not a weapon, not a bottle, not a plea for spare change. It was a badge. Shiny, official, undeniable. FBI. The crowd gasped. One of the officers stumbled back half a step, his mouth falling open like he forgot how to speak. And the so-called homeless man? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw a punch. He simply said, calm as ever, "You're both in a lot of trouble." And for the first time that night, it wasn't the black woman who looked afraid. The air shifted. You could feel it like the moment before a thunderstorm hits. The two officers, who just seconds ago were laughing and swaggering like kings of the block, now stood frozen, blinking at the badge in disbelief. It didn't make sense. It didn't fit the picture they had painted in their heads. Black woman equals criminal. Black homeless man equals nobody. But here he was, standing tall, dust clinging to his jacket, an official FBI badge gleaming under the streetlight like a weapon they never saw coming. "You're FBI?" one of the officers finally croaked, voice cracking under the weight of the moment. The man didn't answer right away. He just stared at them, calm and unblinking, like he was giving them one last chance to realize how badly they had just messed up. Then he spoke. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Internal Affairs Division," he said, flashing a small, cold smile. "And congratulations. You just made my job a whole lot easier tonight." The silence around them deepened. No more phones recording from a distance now. People were stepping closer, holding their cameras higher, their mouths hanging open. The story had flipped, and everyone wanted to catch it live. The woman, the one they tried to break, looked at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. She wasn't alone anymore. And the officers? They weren't predators anymore. They were prey. "I suggest you put those cuffs away," the agent said casually, nodding toward the one officer still holding them limply in his hand. "And maybe start thinking about your defense attorneys." One officer glanced around, probably looking for backup. There was none. The crowd had become the witnesses. The FBI agent had become the shield. And the black woman they tried to humiliate? She stood taller now. Not because anyone had given her strength, but because someone finally recognized she had it all along. In that moment, justice didn't come from the system. It didn't come from the badge they wore. It came from the badge they never saw coming. And the night wasn't over yet. The younger officer dropped the cuffs like they burned his hands. The clatter echoed down the empty street. A sound so small, but somehow louder than the officers shouting from minutes earlier. The FBI agent stepped forward, closing the distance between them with calm, deliberate steps. He didn't need a gun drawn. He didn't need to shout orders. He carried something heavier authority that couldn't be faked. "You want to tell me what your probable cause was?" he asked smoothly, his eyes flicking between the two men. "Or should we skip that part and head straight to the interviews?" The older officer tried to recover first. "She looks suspicious," he mumbled, shoulders hunched now, his earlier arrogance dissolving like smoke. The agent raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious how?" No answer. The woman, still shaking but standing tall now, spoke up for the first time. "I was waiting for my Uber," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." The agent nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off the two officers. "You heard her, so unless waiting for a ride is a crime now..." He let the sentence hang in the air, thick with unspoken consequences. Around them, the crowd grew. Phones were pointed. Whispers rippled. Some people shook their heads in disgust. Others smiled quietly, the kind of smile that only comes when you witness karma unfold right before your eyes. The officers knew it too. They weren't getting out of this. The agent reached into his pocket again, but not for a badge this time. He pulled out a slim recorder, already running. The red light blinked steadily. Everything they had said, every insult they had thrown, every abuse of power had been caught on tape. And they weren't the only ones recorded. The agent turned slightly toward the crowd, making sure everyone could see. "Multiple witnesses," he said almost to himself. "Multiple recordings. This isn't going away." The younger officer looked like he might cry. The older one just stared at the ground, the weight of what was coming crashing down on him. And the woman, she wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't alone. She wasn't powerless. In fact, for the first time that night, the power was finally on her side. And the real consequences were just getting started. The two officers shifted uncomfortably, their badges suddenly feeling heavier on their chests. The younger one opened his mouth, maybe to beg, maybe to explain, but the FBI agent just held up one finger. A silent command. "Don't. You're both officially under investigation," he said, voice steady, sharp. "Anything you say from this point on can and will be used against you." The officers stiffened. They knew the words well. They had said them to others 100 times. But hearing it now directed at them was like being dropped into a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. The agent stepped back, pulling out his phone. Within seconds, 2 more men in dark jackets appeared from the shadows, flashing credentials. Backup. Real backup. Turns out, the homeless man hadn't been alone. There had been eyes everywhere agents planted across the street, in nearby parked cars, blending into the city's background just like he had. Waiting. Watching. The older officer raised his hand slightly, as if surrendering, the irony almost laughable. The younger one stood frozen, too stunned to react. The FBI agent walked over to the black woman. For the first time, his face softened. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. She shook her head slowly, tears brimming in her eyes not from pain, but from sheer emotional exhaustion. "No," she whispered. "Not anymore." He nodded once, respectfully, then turned back to the officers. "You'll be escorted downtown for questioning," he said. "And until further notice, you're both suspended without pay." The words dropped like stones. The crowd, once quiet with shock, started murmuring louder now, voices thick with a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. Justice wasn't just being served. It was being witnessed. The woman wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the cold night air for the first time in hours. But this time, it didn't feel so heavy. Because even though she had been humiliated, even though the system had tried to break her down in plain sight, she had survived. She had been seen. And for once, the ones who thought they were untouchable weren't. And still, this was only the beginning. The agents moved quickly, professionalism carved into every step. They separated the 2 officers without a word. Each one led to opposite sides of the street, like criminals being processed at a crime scene. Because that's exactly what they were now. The FBI agent, the one who had pretended to be homeless, invisible, disposable, watched without expression. It wasn't triumph in his eyes. It wasn't revenge. It was something colder, something deeper. Accountability. He walked back toward the black woman, careful not to crowd her, giving her space in a world that had already taken too much from her tonight. The crowd had shifted too, no longer just spectators. Now they were witnesses to a different kind of history. The kind where someone actually stood up. The kind where power didn't win just because it always had. "You don't have to stay here," the agent said quietly. "You're free to go. But if you want to file a formal statement, I'll walk you through it." The woman looked at him for a long second. And then she nodded, not because she needed permission, but because she chose to fight back in her own way. "I'll do it," she said, voice stronger than before. "I want my voice on record." A small smile tugged at the agent's mouth. Not one of pity. Not one of disbelief. One of respect. He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her, standard issue, with a direct line printed on the back. A real connection. Not a dead-end number that went to a complaint desk no one ever checked. The woman slipped the card into her bag, the same bag that earlier had been treated like some kind of threat, and she lifted her chin a little higher. In the background, the city buzzed like it always did. Cars passing, people laughing down side streets. Life going on, oblivious to what had just shifted here tonight. But for the people who stood on that sidewalk, for the ones who saw it with their own eyes, something was different now. A line had been drawn. And for once, the side of justice didn't just belong to a badge pinned to a uniform. It belonged to truth. It belonged to dignity. It belonged to the people who refused to look away. And the officers who thought they could humiliate her without consequence? They were about to learn just how public their shame would become. The two officers sat on the curb now, hands on their knees, their badges stripped from their chests, their radios taken away. It was strange how small they looked without the weight of authority propping them up. Strange how quickly the roles had reversed. They weren't the law anymore. They were suspects. The undercover agent made a few quick calls, his voice low and professional, as unbothered as if he was ordering coffee. But every word he spoke tightened the noose around the officers' futures. An internal affairs van pulled up within minutes, flashing lights casting long, accusing shadows across the pavement. Two more agents climbed out crisp suits, sharp eyes, and without wasting a second, began collecting witness statements. The black woman sat on a low concrete step nearby, cradling a cup of water someone from the crowd had handed her. Her hands shook a little, but her eyes burned steady. She wasn't broken. She wasn't beaten. She was angry now, and anger could be powerful when pointed in the right direction. A female agent knelt beside her, kind but serious, recording her story with a respect that felt foreign yet deeply needed. Across the street, the undercover agent supervised as the body cameras from the two officers were removed and bagged as evidence. Everything they had said, every choice they made, captured. There was no version of the truth they could spin, no loophole wide enough for them to slip through. The younger officer tried once, muttering something about misunderstanding and protocol, but the senior FBI agent cut him off cold. "Save it for the investigation," he said. His tone left no room for negotiation. And the crowd? They stayed. They kept filming, kept bearing witness. Not because they were hungry for drama, but because deep down, they knew how rare it was to see the scales of justice actually tip toward the people they usually crushed. The woman locked eyes with one of the officers for a brief second. And in that moment, without saying a word, she said everything. "You don't own me. You don't get to define me. And you will never erase what happened here tonight." For once, the badge hadn't protected the abusers. For once, it had protected the truth. The processing was swift. The two officers were read their rights, not in some quiet backroom whisper, but out loud, in front of everyone they had once expected to intimidate. The FBI agents moved like clockwork, efficient and detached. There was no yelling, no struggle, just the slow, heavy realization sinking into the officers' faces that their badges weren't shields anymore. They were evidence. One by one, they were placed in unmarked cars and driven away, swallowed by the night they thought they ruled. And when the last door slammed shut, the energy on that street shifted again. For the first time all night, the air didn't feel suffocating. It felt clean, sharp, electric. The black woman stood up slowly from the curb, still holding the cup in one hand. People around her clapped quietly at first, a few claps here and there, and then louder, a ripple of relief and solidarity moving through the crowd. It wasn't the kind of cheering you hear at a sports game. It was something deeper. It was recognition. Recognition of survival. Recognition of strength. The undercover agent, the man everyone thought was just another forgotten soul, approached her one last time. "You have my number," he said, nodding toward the card she still had tucked in her bag. "If anything else happens, or if you need anything, call. Don't stay silent." For a second, she didn't answer. She just looked at him, this man who had seen her when everyone else looked away. This man who, in a world where black women are too often forced to carry their battles alone, had made the choice to stand beside her. Finally, she gave a small nod. Not a thank you. Not gratitude for being saved. A nod of respect. A nod between warriors who understood the fight wasn't over. It had just started. The agent gave a slight smile, the kind that understood everything words couldn't say, then turned and disappeared into the night without another sound. No parade, no medals, just the quiet satisfaction of having done what was right. And as the crowd slowly broke apart, one by one, the woman stayed standing there a little longer, her head high. Not because she had been rescued, because she had been seen. And because finally, justice had been seen too. But the story wasn't finished yet. There was still fallout coming. And this time, it wouldn't be hidden behind any badge. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, the story had already spread across social media like wildfire. Black woman, harassed by cops, saved by undercover FBI agent. FBI sting operation catches rogue officers live. Clips from the bystanders' phones flooded every platform. Shaky videos showing the officers towering over her, mocking her. Then the slow, stunning reveal of the homeless man, flashing his badge. People weren't just watching. They were reacting. They were sharing. They were angry. The police department had no choice but to respond. A press conference was called within hours. A stiff, uncomfortable chief, standing behind a podium, reading from a statement that sounded more like damage control than true remorse. The actions of the two officers captured on video do not reflect the values of our department, he said, face tight, voice hollow. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities and conducting an internal review. But it was too late for rehearsed apologies. The world had seen the truth with their own eyes. And this time, it wasn't just another incident buried under paperwork and silence. Meanwhile, the woman, no longer just the victim, no longer just a face in a grainy video, was approached by civil rights lawyers offering to represent her. Not just to punish the officers involved, but to shine a light on the deeper, rotting system that allowed it to happen in the first place. She filed a formal complaint. She demanded an independent review. And she sued not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been humiliated, dismissed, or destroyed without anyone bothering to look closer. The two officers were officially suspended without pay pending investigation. And off the record, whispers inside the department said termination wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. The undercover agent's footage, clean, crystal clear evidence, became a cornerstone of the investigation. Not just because it proved the misconduct, but because it proved something bigger. It proved that power could be challenged. It proved that silence could be broken. It proved that the invisible could no longer be ignored. The woman didn't set out that night to change anything. She just wanted to get home. But sometimes, survival itself is an act of revolution. And the ripples of that night would stretch far beyond one city street. Months passed, but the echoes of that night didn't fade. The woman's lawsuit made national headlines. The city council was forced to hold public hearings. New policies were rushed into place, mandatory bias training, stricter oversight on street patrols, and a citizen review board with real power for the first time. It didn't erase what happened. It didn't undo the humiliation. But it sent a message. This time, someone fought back. This time, someone was held accountable. The woman never wanted to be a symbol. She never asked to be a name in the news. She just wanted to live her life without being treated like a threat. But when injustice forced her into the spotlight, she didn't flinch. She stood there, bruised but unbroken, refusing to be silenced. And the undercover agent? He faded back into the background where he started. No interviews, no fame, no credit, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that one night, on one lonely street, he did what too many others didn't. He saw, he listened, he acted, and maybe that was enough. Because the real power of that night wasn't just in the arrests. It wasn't in the lawsuit, or the headlines, or the policy changes. It was in the simple, stubborn, undeniable truth. You can humiliate someone. You can try to silence them. You can try to bury them under shame and fear. But the truth has a way of standing back up. The truth has a way of fighting louder than any badge, any uniform, any lie. And sometimes, the people you think are powerless are the ones who change everything.